But what is it? What is the good news? What is the gospel? How would you explain the gospel? Would you talk about sin? Would you talk about the cross? Because if you think about it, this is right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He hadn't yet died on the cross. So what was he proclaiming? It's this. Here comes God's kingdom. The kingdom of God has come near. This is a term you may already be familiar with. It's an important concept to know and understand because, well, we talk about it a lot here at Christ City. It's part of our vision statement, to see the flourishing of God's kingdom on display in every life, in every sphere of life, in DC and beyond. But more importantly, it's a good concept to know and understand because Jesus talked about it a lot. More than about sin, more than about money, more than anything else, Jesus talked about the kingdom of God. Another way of describing the kingdom of God is the rule and reign of God. The rule and reign of God. In other words, what it looks like when God is in charge. You know, we might think of kingdom as a political or geographical entity like the Kingdom of Monaco or the United Kingdom, but the kingdom of God is the expression of God. Okay? So just as when we express ourselves, we might raise a hand or we might turn our bodies away or we might speak words, when God expresses God's self, there is truth and healing and goodness and justice and restoration. And anywhere God's will is done is within God's kingdom. And those words from Isaiah's prophecy, which we read earlier, which Jesus claimed for himself, good news for the poor, freedom for the captive and the oppressed, sight for the blind, hearing for the deaf, healing for the sick, cleansing for the unclean, life for those who are dead. This is what God's kingdom looks like. This is what it looks like when God is in charge, when God expresses God's self. And this kingdom supersedes and transcends every other kingdom. The good news of the Roman Empire pales in significance when placed alongside the good news of Jesus Christ. The good news of the American Empire, of America first, cannot hold a candle to the glory of the city whose gates are always open, and whose light is the very presence of God, and whose inhabitants are a multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic gathering. This kingdom, Mark is saying, is here. Because Jesus is here. Jesus, the herald, the harbinger, the bringer of God's kingdom of life and liberation, of joy and justice. Jesus, the opposer of unholy empire and short-sighted individualism and isolationism. Jesus, the destroyer of lies and half-truths, the dismantler of oppression and exploitation. In Jesus, God's kingdom has come near.